Joel True, and welcome to a very secret edition of Strange New Pod. I am your predator and host this week, and I am joined by the best bridge crew this side of the neutral zone. How we doing? Everybody good?
Joel True, motherfuckers.
Oh yeah, Julian is here, wondering when is Talshia night at the Romulan disco.
I'd love
every
a
night.
Talshia.
It's
Every
Talshia
night.
night.
Every night.
It's Talshia night.
With murder in the bathroom.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
MC does think that those pointy ears are pretty aesthetically pleasing, right?
Always.
Always. Hawk is not here. He's still assembling his giant office chair to do a.
It won't spin around yet.
It just doesn't spin.
Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah, and we know that Eric is still trying to integrate the cloaking device to this podcast, so
Yeah.
we'll see.
Yeah.
He's
Maybe
invisible right now.
It
'cause
crosswired. It crosswired with Hawk's EMH program.
Oh, problems.
Yeah, problems.
This week it is my favorite Star Trek episode, the Enterprise incidents from the original series. Very, very surprising, right? But before we get into the episode this week, we need to thank our amazing Patreon collective members at the Ready Room level and above. Julian, this is your turn.
I know it had to be me, right? Since I'm not hosting, I was like,
Had
it's
to be
gonna be
you.
me. A very special thank you to Simon Stager, Jeff Reeve, Mariah Gossett, Tallulah, Jen Stein, Tina Alexander, Joe Saporito, Noe Santos, Kung Hui, Takaku Nagumo, Fernando Nogales, SMK, Colin Davidson, Shatterhand 2049, Jesco, Michael Graham, Emily and Travis, Maggie Light, Wayne Ritz, Scone of Arc, Sean, Jay Howard, Mahelani Uchiyama, Matt Harker, Joshua Lewis, Tara Poland, Slope 74, Rude Parakeet, Aaron W., Carl Angoli, Michael Kwan, Caitlin, Elizabeth Dean, Jim McMahon, Sedano 317, Puka Hair, 3 Fry Short, Cat Tip, Tripping Lareed Alert Over a Pineapple, Sean Manning, Asher at the Bat, Chris Waterman, RHCB, Martin Simpson, Norman Buckwald, David Prime Hildebrand, Taryn J. Robinson, Rod Grenier, Eric the Red, Troubled, Jamie Roberts, Honeyberry, Paul Taylor Pitt, Brett Jones, Michelle P., Margin Walker 82, Melissa Bartell, Jesse Robbins, and our newest collective members, Kim and this is a big one, Chris Finoglio. What's up, man? Thank you. That's an honor. Yeah, it is. You guys freaking rock.
And as well as a big thank to our Badmirals, our EPs, Seaman Steger, Chris Waterman, Tara Poland, Brad Jones, Dana, Matt Harker, and the newest Badmiral, collective member, Jane McMahon. Oh, hello. News. Sorry, I'm going to forget 5 times that I'm hosting that podcast. It's all good. It's all good.
You're doing a great job.
Thank you. News. So, Warp Your Own Way bonus podcast is available now and exclusively on Patreon. If you want to hear us complain about dying 17,000
We
times,
complained a lot.
$2 level, you can go and listen to this. This episode will not be released to the public. So yay, join our Patreon. Speaking of to Patreon, 2 more bits of news. One, during the watch along of yesterday's Enterprise on Tuesday, the quarterly stickers for Patreon members was revealed, and it is an awesome Enterprise, not A, not B, but C, art by MC. Do you have it here? Can we see it?
I do not.
We do not. You can go
No, on the
easily if
Discord.
you're our patron or in your email. It is there. MC also just revealed today, didn't make it to the outline, that awesome Voyager postcard.
Postcard.
Yeah.
Has that been
Yeah.
posted in the Discord?
No, but it's been publicly posted to Patreon for 10 forward members. So they've seen
Okay.
it. So yeah, it's awesome.
It's a very sexy sticker, says Dana.
Thank you.
And 2, we are recording our first Strange New Adventures gaming session this Sunday. Stay tuned for when that will be available. We don't know yet. Are there other news?
I don't think so. I think that's
I
it.
have news.
Oh, news it up.
Yeah,
It's
I
your
just
show.
learned that I'm gonna be a panelist on the Star Trek panel at WonderCon.
Hey.
Hey. I'm always at WonderCon, so come say hi. It's end of March. We have a little bit of time, but yes, I will be there. And well, I don't know that anybody here has anything on them, but remember that you still get 20% off your first purchase at Heroes and Villain by using the code STRANGE. There are a lot of new stuff, so go check out their website.
We got a package coming soon that will be showing off some stuffs. So
Bribe to the Empire.
hey,
I don't have the blip blip,
I got
but
you.
it's time for the strange new loop. Okay, allegedly, if you had to drag your crew to do something somewhat completely illegal in the Star Trek universe, what would it be?
I've been thinking about this since
Good.
I saw the Strange New Loop, and I have yet to
Like
be
an
able
hour
to
ago.
come up with an answer. But I've thought hard about it. I feel like all the cool legal things that you would do in Star Trek have been done already. Like, you know what I mean? Like, let's use an example. One thing I would obviously do, like if it needed to be done, like I have no problem stealing a starship. I would steal a starship if I
What
needed
would you
to.
steal the Enterprise for?
I'd steal the Enterprise to go like rescue someone. Like if I know it's a lame answer, but like I wouldn't pull a fucking Jonathan Archer and like steal a warp coil that would strand Illyrians for like 75 years, you know?
And
Like-
completely destroy their society.
And completely
That's
destroy their
illegal.
society. That's very illegal, but also bad. Like
Yes. Mm.
so I don't know. I'm too much of a goodie for this Strange New Loop. Like I don't.
But it's a Romulan strange new
I
loop. It has to
know.
be a bit mean.
I might just go hang out with Daddy Pike on Talos 4.
See?
That's a good
Good
answer.
job. A great answer.
I would.
He's really trying to be bad.
I would hijack Voyager's computer systems. I would rematerialize Tuvix.
No.
And
Why?
then, but wait,
Just so we could kill him.
and then I would airlock him.
So wait, would you combine Tuvok and Neelix together, or would you transporter clone?
I would transporter clone, like I would use the buffer to like, which had, I would assume still has the Tuvix pattern in there. I would take Voyager into an orbit enough where asphyxiation would happen upon airlocking and watch Tuvix die.
It's just like
Just like that. Just like that.
mean.
I needed to be evil for a second. This is your strange
don't
new loop.
have to be evil. Like I, for example, would totally steal a starship to or find out where the Borg come from, because that's something I always wanted to know.
It's a great answer.
I mean, we like their original planet. Or something like trying to see what up with the Gorn Dominion. Like how does that
Hmm.
function? Like I'd do some spying.
Yeah, let's remember that temporal chicanery is completely illegal. So
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
all
like going back in
allegedly.
time.
I said allegedly.
Okay, then I take back my Tuvix. I would go back in time. I would find the NX-01. I would transport Archer aboard, and I'd airlock him.
Oh, it's we're still on airlocking.
I'm still
We're
airlocking
still on
people.
airlocking.
Okay, this is a mode. We're airlocking.
I'm airlocking people.
War crimes.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, well, I'm on war crimes tonight. Sorry. Hey, Romulans love war crimes.
Hey, allegedly.
Allegedly.
In that episode, speaking of which, they're not the one doing any war crimes for once.
That's true.
This is true.
Just saying.
I like Kung's answer. Find an ion storm and party with the Terrans.
For example, I like that.
Good one.
Steal and smuggle some Romulan ale, obviously from Eric the Red.
Mm.
Oh, I want to steal a starship to go to DS9 and have a heart-to-heart with a junior reporter from Jin Kang. Okay, so see, no need to like do crimes. No need to airlock people. Okay, today we are talking about the Enterprise incident, my favorite episode, written by the legendary DC Fontana.
Woo.
In this episode, Kirk's bizarre behavior leads the Enterprise straight into Romulan space, not the neutral zone. Romulan space, where they are taken prisoner by a formidable and charismatic Romulan commander. While Spock charms his way into her trust, Kirk
And her
is-
pants.
Hey, and her hands, and
Wow.
her skirts, and her Roman nail, and her quarters. Kirk is executed, maybe? Only for it to be revealed that it's all an elaborate Starfleet espionage mission. Dun, dun, dun. So, what were you? First of all, do you remember when you watched that episode first? Were you a kid or was it recently? Let's start by MC because Julian did the patrons.
I think I first watched this one when I was doing my lockdown Star Trek watch all of the things. So it was only a couple of years ago. And my initial thoughts were, my God, I love this episode. And my God, I love Spock. And my God, this episode's really horny.
It is so
In like
horny.
a really weird way, because there's like other episodes where it's like people are scantily clad and like embracing, but this one is just like, it's sensual.
Very, very sensual. Julian?
Yeah, so I know exactly where I was. Do you remember like in the, I think it was like the mid 90s, Sci-Fi Channel?
Do I remember the midnight? I'm too young for that, Julian.
Oh.
Mid-90s.
Do you remember in the mid 90s when Sci-Fi Channel did their giant TOS marathon and they had interviews like with the cast? I think George Takei even like hosted the thing. Anyway, my grandfather taped them all. And like I watched the tape. So like I just basically I think I've told the story before about like how they used to have like a lazy boy down in the basement and like I would get my Picard jumpsuit and like pretend to be the captain. I remember just binging so much TOS on those VHSs, and that was definitely the first time I'd watch it among that whole marathon of TOS episodes. So yeah, it's been a bit.
And did you like it? Do you
Yes,
remember
I
your
loved it. I
reaction?
mean, listen, like I love Star Trek. Duh, stupid comment, but I love Star Trek. I could find the good in just about any episode. So yeah, I love it. And like I don't have like the same like reverence and love for TOS that you do. Like I still like it a lot, but this episode back then is a classic. It's a classic now. Like it's cool. Like this week we've been talking about episodes I think that are like must watch episodes of television. Like we were talking about yesterday's Enterprise this week. I think that Enterprise incident is still a must watch episode of television.
He says that because it was my chosen episode, but
No, I don't. Like I
No,
really,
I know.
I really mean that. Like this is a
Yeah.
like probably a top 5, maybe even top 3 episode of TOS.
I would
Mhm.
say it's definitely, I think it's my favorite episode of season 3.
Oh, that easily. I watched it when I was a kid. I remember like maybe like late 80s or early 90s, and I remember being stricken by the Romulan commander because she's wearing pink, she's wearing gold, her quarters are pink. She's like getting into Spock's pants, which I always wanted to, and and also she's like the leader. And I know that even in the 90s there were more like female leaders in sci-fi, but not that much. But I remember she was like, oh, so beautiful. And fun fact, that was my first Star Trek cosplay. I had never done any costume from Star Trek until I did my Romulan commander way back when, like
That's
5
really
years
cool.
ago.
Nice.
Yes. So this is my favorite episode. I think we'll know. And it keeps being my favorite episode, not only for the reason I had when I was a kid, because the more I rewatch this episode and the more I see how it informed so much of the canon of Star Trek. And it's interesting that we were talking before the pod started, how this episode holds on compared to a lot of TOS that sometimes you're like, this is dumb. I love it, but this is the bit. It really holds on. Like still now, with all the example of like female captains and so on, we have the Romulan commander is still so good. She's so well written. I'm gonna talk about why it's my favorite episode throughout the whole thing. So I'm gonna skip her head. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to read a couple of comments about where people watched it for the first time on the
Where I
chat as
said
well.
that I'm so good. Yes, thank you.
Where you say that you're so good and you picked a great episode. Jim asked if I still have those tapes. I don't, unfortunately, which is a shame, but Eric said on the classic TOS marathons of the 90s, that's how I saw most of TOS as a kid. Those marathons were all over the place. They were wonderful. And Kung, I remember watching it in the late 80s when The Cage was broadcast on TV for the first time.
So let's deep dive. Let's go. Let's start. So I wanted to start with the cold open because I think it's a great cold open. Kirk is acting erratic. He's very Shatner-esque way. It's very puzzling. It's intriguing. It's unusual. We don't know what's going on, right? Even tells Spock's off. It is the second time in TOS that the Romulan and their infamous neutral zone are brought up. What's your take on the opening? What do you think of that opening? MC, sorry.
Well, I haven't, just watching this right before, I've never really thought about the cold open, but I was thinking about it this time. It does open with medical log from McCoy.
Mhm.
And I thought it was really interesting the way they did it because they're really fooling the like it's only there to fool the audience so that we're wondering what's going on with Kirk. But it seems like at least later on we find out that McCoy knows exactly what's going on. So it seemed a little weird. Did they have McCoy make this log thinking that the Romulans would be able to get in to the logs, because that seems like a very Romulan thing to do.
Or just plausible deniability by Starfleet as well.
That's true. And yes, this is Shatner at the height of Shatnering. It's beautiful.
Julian?
Yeah, it's a great cold open because Kirk's been questioned on his bridge before, right? But like, this is,
he's been removed.
Yeah, and removed. But like, this is just like they don't know what to make of it. It's like when Janeway orders Picard to Romulus the first time, and Nemesis was like, "You want to go to Romulus?" And he kind of gives her like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" And everyone on the bridge of the Enterprise now, like at this point, like, dude, you just said Romulus, and like Sulu has to look back at him and be like, are you sure? He's like, you heard the order, like execute it now. Like Kirk is like, what I like about Shatner's performance in the cold open, and honestly like throughout this whole episode, is it's the very cinematic version of Shatner that we see in the films. And I really notice a distinct difference in the way that he acted this episode over, other episodes of the original series.
Yeah, it's a very complex episode for Kirk. We'll talk about that later. But like again, for the audience at that time, the Romulans had been brought up only once before. But the reaction of everybody when he crosses into the neutral zone and then the Roman Empire is so, you're like, oh, that's a big deal. Who are these guys? What is going on? But I like the fact that he's so erratic, but they still all obey. And it always begs the question, like, how much do they know? Or like, for me, it's always like, oh, they're just obeying blindly at the beginning. But the more you watch the episode, you wonder, like, did they know? Like, how much did they know? How much did they doubt, like, thought that something like this was going on? Because he had been removed in another episode. Like, right now, it's out of my head. But he had been... He's questioned, he's removed of duty and so on. And you see them questioning his decision, but not here. And it's such a good like suspense of what is going to happen next. And what happened next is the Romulans showed up, right? Because they're living, loving, and lurking around the neutral zone as always. And when Kirk and Spock are made to go to the commander, she turns and ta-da! It's a woman. Nowadays, we don't necessarily see this reveal as a huge thing, but the Roman commander is one of the few female leaders that we're going to see in TOS, and also she's part of a rare dynamic where a female antagonist is not portrayed as outright evil or conniving or mean. Or, how does she compare, in your opinion, to other women in positions of power, such as number one in the Cage and Mara? I don't know if Day of the Dove. I know
Mhm.
you got this one.
It's been a
Does
bit
this
for
make
me. Yeah.
does this make her a more compelling character in your opinion? To give you an idea, Mara in Day of the Dove, she's a Klingon, and she's more erratic. She's way more out for blood. She's way more also easily like manipulated by the people around her. She's an interesting character in Day of the Dove. MC.
I think the Romulan commander is done so interestingly because she is without a doubt written as a feminine character, but at the same time, everything, all of her actions in this are things that could be done by a male character. Like, absolutely, you could see this story being done as, you know, a male Romulan commander is trying to romance Uhura. And this story would change very little because, and at the time, you didn't really have these female characters who could both command but also have this very romantic and sexy thing with Spock. Because if you think about all of the other times there have been women in power that usually Kirk has ended up romancing, it's all about putting them in their place and they end up spooning. This Romulan commander would never swoon.
I want that in a t-shirt, on a shirt. This woman commander will never spoon. Julian?
Yeah, you know, it's hard to compare them, right? Because what MC said is accurate. They're just like weren't many back then. You know, number one being the example, and we got literally one episode to go off of, which, you know, for the little that she was in, she was very strong. And you know, obviously, we get the continuation with that now in Strange New Worlds, and I think Rebecca Romaine does a great job of like showing her in a position of power. But what I like a lot about Romulan Commander here is that use of like sexual prowess to get like what she wants, because it's not like, as much as we talk about Jean's vision and that skirt is super short, right? Um
It is.
that was using like sexuality as like, you know, as like a weapon, right? And I think it works so well, and it makes her such an interesting character. And I think Romulan Commander in this episode makes way for other great female baddies, right? Like the Duras
Mhm.
sisters, like Sela later on in TNG, even our fave in Picard, whose name
Marisa.
yeah, right?
I think I have a question somewhere
Yeah,
at the
yeah.
end. Yeah.
So no, like she's amazing, but like everything that she does with Spock, like we were just discussing this on Discord. I'm sure we'll talk about it later in the episode, but like using that as like a manipulation, because I do think that while she does want the Enterprise, I think she also wants Spock as a prize to bring back to the Empire.
Oh, absolutely. And what is interesting to me is that it's rare in even in Star Trek now to have a female character in power that also have a sexuality. Like Janeway famously could not have a sexuality. She could not be sexual because that would have been undermining her power. Also for the people that were watching, also for the audience. And we see, for example, the Dress Sister, it's not done in a good way. They're kind of mocked. They're kind of like ridiculous for it, right? They're kind of weak for it. I think the other character that comes to mind for me is Keller, because
Yeah.
she has this like magnetic sexuality, and at the same time, she's so powerful and so bright, and so, you know, well, she gets killed. Spoilers. But it's very rare. Even for Burnham, it was really complicated to have her as a, you know, sexual being. She not so much. She had a relationship, but you know, it was like a problem for a lot of people in the audience. And I really like that that character is in power. She's a woman, but she's also, yeah, using everything she can to do her job and lying to Spock. We'll talk about that later. Like, let's talk about a Vulcan amongst humans. With Spock, she uses common ancestry between the Vulcan and Romulans, which will, come back in several episodes later. And she tries to manipulate Spock into giving her the Enterprise so they don't blow it up, because that's the alternative. So she needs a man in the inside that would, make the crew comply. What do you think of the relationship between these two? In your opinion, who's manipulating who? I was lurking in the in the Discord, and there's always the thing like, oh, she was so into Spock, she didn't realize he was lying. What do you think of this, MC?
Both. The answer is both. They're both manipulating each other, and that's why they're perfect for each other. These two are on such equal ground. It just happens that Spock is the one that came out ahead in this. And I think like she totally acknowledges that Spock is the one that comes out ahead. And I think she likes Spock, but she's also a Romulan commander. You don't become a Romulan commander by becoming all dewy-eyed over the first handsome Vulcan you see. No, you're going to use every arrow in your quiver. And one of those arrows is going to be that you're a hot Vulcan in a short dress. And
She's a Romulan.
Oh, sorry, Romulan. Sorry. I was thinking for a second.
Well,
I was thinking about Spock in a short dress.
C plot.
That's also
She was
possible.
Vulcan all along.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, maybe she's a Vulcan plant. Who knows?
But yes, a Romulan is not going to fall immediately for anybody. There's always going to be this push and pull, and I think as much as Picard season 1 is maligned, we can look at this episode and compare it to the plot in that, which is very much the honey trap. A Romulan's going to try to seduce Spock, but it might be for fun, but it might also be because we think that we can get Spock on our side.
Mm-hmm. Julian?
Yeah, so I really think that while both are 100% manipulating each other, I feel like by the end of this episode, even though the Romulans lose, like they do lose, right? Like Scotty installs the cloaking device on the Enterprise.
Somehow.
I actually wrote in the chat, and you have to assume this is one of the factors that led to the Treaty of Algeron. Like,
1000%. Yes.
So like Kirk, Spock, and Enterprise clearly won here, but I want to still say by the end of this episode, Romulan Commander got the upper hand on Spock, because when they're in the turbo lift at the end of the episode, Spock is shooketh. Like he is feeling, and he I think actually is probably struggling a bit at this episode, trying to figure out how he was almost like I don't, Data in First Contact where he's like 0.98 seconds, or that's how long I thought about the Borg Queens, to make me look and be human.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's like a second or two where Spock thinks about taking her offer, like where he might break. And that I think is very evident in the final moments of this episode. So as far as like the mission, yeah, Starfleet wins. As far as like psychological warfare, I think Romulan Commander wins here.
Yeah, I think what is very interesting to me, and I wanted to speak about this when we talk about Spock, but you know what? Let's continue. Let's dig into this. What's very interesting to me is that he introduced himself as she's surprised to see a Vulcan. Like very clearly, they were not aware that there was a Vulcan on the Enterprise. And I like the fact that she's surprised, because it tells us like how much the Romulan know about what's going on, or assume that they know what's going on in the Federation. Like they've been spying, right? And when she finds that Vulcan, she's like, that's going to be my in. I'm going to work that guy until it gives me an in and gives me that ship. But it tells her that he's half Vulcan, half human. And for me, it's always like resonates so much as she never says that. She's like, but what's your allegiance? What's your culture? And he says Vulcan. And then from there, she pivots again because he had said human. She was like, yeah, I'm breaking that guy. He's giving me that chip. But then she's like, oh, Vulcan. And then she's always like, oh, as a Vulcan, you can study the Roman culture. As a human, you can find ways to appreciate it. And she's always like trying to work what Spock is doing on that ship and who he is and how much she said she can get an in into that man because he's human. She's like, if he's human, he feels. If he feels, I can get him. I can get in his pants. I can get him to give me that ship. And it's always really interesting to me that people read the commander as the one that falls in love in the story because I don't think she does. I think she's intrigued by that guy. 1000% she's intrigued. But also she's always has the eye on the prize. And she is one of the rare person that takes Spock in his entirety, that like is interesting by the whole guy. Like human, Vulcan, what can that bring me? How can I play somebody that, has both cultures and know both ways and like what do I do with that? Which for me is always fascinating when I rewatch this episode.
Kang in the chat, or Kung in the chat wrote, I'm dubious that Tal Shiar didn't know Spock was on the Enterprise. He's been on there for nearly all of his 18-year career.
Yeah, but I don't think she's Tal Shiar, honestly.
No, I think she's Romulan. Yeah.
Yeah, I think she's like Romulan
Romulan.
army.
Yeah.
Just like, yeah. And I do think she didn't know. Or maybe she pretends not to know. Who knows?
And we know that Tal Shiar does not share everything with the Romulan military.
Face of the enemy.
Yep.
Very clearly. Yeah.
There was, when she's greeting Kirk and Spock, this way that she does repeatedly say Spock's name that did just kind of ping something in me. That's like, maybe she didn't know Spock was on the Enterprise, but I feel like she knows exactly who Spock is.
I would agree with that.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
She knows he's the son of an ambassador. And I feel there is something and that participate of why she wants him back on Romulus. Because if she can turn that guy, everything is for her. Like she got the Enterprise and the son of Sarek. She's golden. She's Praetor. She's like top of the food chain. Yeah, and it's after Journey to Babel, so we also know that as an audience, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So this episode expands on Romulan culture that we had seen only one episode before, right? Showing them as strategic but honorable, rather than outright villains. How does this portrait compare to later Romulan depiction in TNG and even beyond?
Well, first of all, this was really funny. I watched this episode with Faye tonight, and the only other TOS episode we have watched is Balance of Terror.
Hey, perfect.
I had to say, disclaimer, there's really not that many Romulan episodes in TOS.
There's two, right? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, there's two. But as for the depiction of Romulans after this, it gets so much more aggro later on, like in TNG. And because there's this level of intrigue going on, because the Romulans are so kind of shiny and new to the Federation, despite the fact that there was apparently this whole Romulan war that happened back in the Enterprise era. But I guess
the Roman Vulcan war also that like lasted 100 years.
Yeah, but since it's only in Balance of Terror that they discover that what they look like, and I guess they're now kind of the Federation and the Romulans are now feeling each other out. And by the time we get to TNG, things have really started to heat up a lot more, and people are just angrier at each other and more willing to just really go for it. And instead of this more personal kind of mental combat, it's a lot more of the hardcore espionage.
Julian?
Yeah, honestly, it's been well documented that the writers of TNG just did not know what to do with the Romulans because they wanted them to be the big bad of the show, but it wasn't working, and they kind of just ended up being like mustache twirly villains. They tried with the Ferengi too, and that didn't work, so they had to rework the Ferengi for
That didn't
DS9.
work.
But speaking of DS9, like they were, even though they weren't in DS9 a whole lot, it was really like the later seasons. But when they did show up, it was kind of back to like what we saw in here, kind of more the mental games. They're not mustache twirly villains. Like they can show them interacting with each other on like decent terms. Like, listen, the Romulans are the people that lent the Defiant the cloaking device, right? So there's
Hey, they won that war. Without
yeah.
the Romans, everybody was screwed.
Yeah, so like DS9 establishes that there can still be like a dialogue, where TNG they just wanted to be villains. And obviously we get them in Picard, and they kind of get just turned, in my opinion, back to, even though I love Narissa, into just like a straight up uninteresting villain, even though there's some cool Romulan lore in Picard season 1.
I was like, come on.
Yeah, no, I got you, girl. I got you. I would say that like DS9 and obviously the 2 episodes of TOS we get are like where we get the best of the Romulans.
Yeah,
and Nemesis. There's good Romulan shit in Nemesis.
The only 2% in the world that love Nemesis are on that podcast, so let's go. No, I agree. It's very interesting how they're complex in TOS, but I do think also because they're an allegory for like the 60s and the Cold War, right? And there is disrespect to your enemy. Like they may be your enemy, but they're good at what they're doing, right? And the Romans, the Klingons, like where there's the Vietnam War, there's like all this like to take into account in the representation of those enemies in TOS that I think get lost on TNG because they don't have they're not working under the same metaphors, and they're just like, okay, what the fuck are we gonna do with the Romulans now? Oh, I guess they're just gonna be liars. And it's interesting that there are episodes where like the Romulans have this very interesting like lore and relationship to the Federation. Like my most hated episode ever, but the chase, for example, the Romulans are the only one being like, there is something here and it's very important and you see it and I see it. The other ones are dumb fuck, but know that I know. And we see that in Discovery with the the rest. You also see this in Voyager in what's the name of that Message in a Bottle? Which one is it?
It's Eye of the Needle.
The one we just watched, Eye of the Needle, yeah.
Eye of the Needle with that, Roman scientist that is really like understanding the plea and what is going on and really wants to help. And I think they're curious people. And you also see that a lot in Picard with the with Elnor and the Romulan diaspora and all this. And I like the fact that we went back to these other empire, these other people that are very powerful, right? They're very different, but they also earn the respect of the Federation somehow. Not really on human rights, but
there's that really good episode of DS9 where Kira is working with like the delegate of the Romulan Empire aboard the station because there's warbirds, stationed there because they're at the war now. And much like what Kirk and the Enterprise do in this episode to steal the Enterprise, to steal the cloaking device, the Romulan on board DS9 uses this as an advantage to put weapons on Bajor's moon. Yes. Right? Yeah. Like that's where this is where Romulans thrive, is like in the shadows and manipulating the system. And
there's an agenda in the agenda.
Yeah, dude. And even Admiral Ross in this episode is like, I know that you want to like put this big stand against the Empire, Kira, but like, girl, they got you. Like,
yeah, like you're screwed. Like, just walk back.
Yeah.
But and we're gonna talk about it with Una McCormack, but in Second Self, the Romulan, like in the novel in Picard, like such interesting. Same thing, like, yeah, they have agendas. They're different than your agendas, but they also understand what you're doing. They're never portrayed as dumb. And I really like this because sometimes, like the Dura sister, for example, you're like, oh boy, you're dumb.
They're dumb, but like what I think what's great about the Dura sisters too, though, is that they're like cockroaches. Like they're dumb, but they still kind of find a way and manage and keep showing up to kind of like put a wrench in the system.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about Spock a little bit more. Sorry, we talk a lot. We're going to speak about Spock a little bit more. Nobody has any problem with that, right?
Never have a problem talking about Spock.
As much as Kirk is like playing an idiot and a fool and erratic guy like through that episode until like it gets revealed that it's all a game, Spock skates away with technicality, in my opinion. That he never really knew what Kirk was about, allegedly, so he couldn't lie, right? When he tells the commander that Kirk is mentally unfit for command, it's a big reveal. Everybody thinks he's a traitor. I mean, not everybody. Chappelle thinks he's a traitor.
She would at this point.
You should know better. But how long have they been together on the Enterprise? Like, for real, like 2 centuries. Come on, girl. It's not the first time, nor the last, that Spock is going to play an ambiguous role when it comes to his captain, like in Amok Time, for example, or even with the Romulan when we see in Unification later in TNG. Do you believe him, or do you think he's just playing along? Do you think he knows, or do you think he's just like making it up as it goes? MC.
I think Spock absolutely knows what's going on. There's nobody who's a better liar for somebody who's not supposed to be able to lie than Spock.
Do you think Kirk told him? Or do you think he is guesstimating what's going on?
I think Spock knew exactly what was going on. I think the main trio, these BFFs, I think all 3 of them knew what was going on. I don't think that Kirk would be able to get into any of this without Spock and McCoy knowing what's going on, because one, McCoy is able to take Kirk out of commission if he doesn't.
And he did it before.
Yeah. Exactly. And Spock would also take Kirk out of commission if he thought that he was endangering the ship without cause. So I think, yes.
Like in 09.
I wasn't going to mention the Kelvin verse, but I was thinking of the Kelvin verse. Of course I was. So yeah, I think all 3 of them knew. I think that everything that went on with Spock becoming close to the Romulan commander was him taking advantage of a situation where she's trying to take advantage of his situation. Everybody's trying to take advantage. But I do think Spock knew what was up with Kirk, because of course he would, because I don't think that Spock would ever think that Kirk would get that bad.
Yeah.
Julian?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with MC. Not to be boring, but we know these 3, right? Like, they share everything. Does Spock know every single detail of the mission? No. But I do think that Kirk gets off the horn with Starfleet and goes and gets McCoy and goes and gets Spock, reads them in. We have a classified mission from Starfleet. Doesn't tell them what that classified mission is. You need to back me up, even if this sounds insane. So I think they know that it's
Something
a batshit crazy plan.
Yeah.
Whether Spock knows all the details, even if he does, you can't. The whole Vulcans don't lie thing is a bullshit that they spew.
Oh,
like
1000%.
Come on, Vulcans lie all the goddamn time. You also can't join Starfleet if you can't lie, because Starfleet asked you to lie all the damn time. No, they knew. The only person that didn't know was like the rest of the crew. And dude, Scotty has no idea what the fuck's going on. Scotty's just like, I can't leave the bridge right now. They're in this situation, Captain. Or Commander.
Like, I'm not coming to your sick bed.
Yeah,
I have work to do.
Yeah, dude, exactly.
I like that Scotty they can't tell him, because if they tell him, he's gonna just screw it somehow.
Well,
so
screw it,
no,
but
that guy doesn't need to know.
I think what we talked about earlier too is like there does need to be, I think, some form of plausible deniability on board the ship in case they did get captured,
I honestly think that they didn't tell Spock everything so he could get away in a technicality, because Kirk is all about not having the crew being blamed if they get fucked. And he is the only one that knows all the details. And he wants plausible deniability for everyone around, because if he gets killed, if they get captured, if somebody betrayed him, if something happens, he wants Spock to be able to be like, I didn't know. I played along because I had no clue, but I didn't know. And I do think that he doesn't know what is going on, but I don't think but he's definitely not buying the the crazy, you know? It's like he knows that that guy is acting up for a good reason. He doesn't know what the good reason is, but he's loyal. He's gonna play along, right?
Did you see
And
Kung's headcanon earlier?
no.
If you watch Enterprise Incident in production order, it's right after the Paradise Syndrome. It's my headcanon that the crew thinks he's still off based on what happened with Miramani.
Ooh, I like
That's
this.
interesting. I like that.
Yeah, I like that too. Yeah. But that does not excuse like just
No.
driving into the
No, not
the
at all.
Romulan space for no good ass reason.
I think that's our explanation. The writers had absolutely
No,
no.
not a goddamn clue, right?
Nah. We can appreciate all Vulcans, all these Vulcans, all distant brothers, right? So they have these like very deep conversation. I like the fact that that's going to show up in the Kelvin verse again. I'm helping you here. I'm giving you things. But like that conversation is layered with subtext that I don't think the audience back then had, but now that we can have that subtext. We all agree that he was trying to manipulate her, but he's also genuinely intrigued by her. How do you think this encounter and the downfall of the Roman commander foreshadow? I mean, not obviously foreshadow, but you know what I mean. Spock's involvement with the Romulan down the line. MC, go ahead.
I think if we look back at the balance of terror, there is that moment where they pull in on Spock and the eyebrow goes up when he sees the Romulans for the first time. And I think that there was such an intrigue for Spock at finding out that there was this connection between them. And I think, and the Romulan commander kind of brings us up in talking about the Vulcan being intrigued by her and the Earth, the Terran being able to appreciate her. So I think that there is this part of the Romulan culture that does appeal to a wider breadth of Spock than I think that he's been really able to have with being in these two disparate cultures where people are kind of expecting him to be one or the other. And so going down this route where it's distant brothers, cousins once removed or whatever, it is something that he can pursue. And I think he's been doing that since Balance of Terror. And I think that just kind of kicks up a notch here with this connection he had with the Romulan commander. And this is obviously something that is going to go on for the next 100-something years, because when we get to unification, Spock is the one who has started off this whole, let's get us all back together. I mean, it wasn't the Federation who sent Spock to do that. In fact, he was going against the Federation because Picard's being sent to go after him. So I definitely think that this is a lifelong love of Spock's that is kind of kicked off. Maybe the same way that Dax has an interest in Klingon culture, except it's just a little bit closer to him.
Julian?
Yeah, it's no secret that Unifications 1, 2, and 3 are like some of my top episodes of Star Trek ever. I think that this is obviously the kind of the spark that ignites him, because I think someone in the chat said it earlier that you could interpret Romulan commanders, what she's trying to do with Spock here, is also possibly believing in unification, maybe for different motives, but that she believes it's possible too. And whether that's what Spock is immediately thinking at the, by the end of this episode, as I said earlier, like he is shook at this point. And I think it definitely does do something. Yeah. Eric just wrote Unification Part 0.
Yeah.
It's so evident, right? Because we know how much, hatred and just back and forth, is between Spock and Sarek, right? And Spock has always been very loyal to Starfleet. Like, I don't think Spock ever set out to become an ambassador, right? But but I think because of what he feels and begins to feel about Romulans and the fact that he believes that he can bring these two people's back together, I think that he kind of decides to follow in his father's footsteps to meet this eventual end game, even if it takes a couple hundred years and veering away from his first love, which was Starfleet, right? Like this is someone who ended up, you know, making the peace between the Federation and the Klingons. That's a big thing to have in your resume when you eventually go to live on Romulus and try and reunify the two people. So I think like he sacrificed a lot to kind of do an end, like find the ends to the means of a reunification, all because of,
Mhm.
you know, this kind of being the starting point, the spark, like right here in this episode.
I agree. I think that, you know, his two first encounters with the Romulans were with people that were so honorable, so interesting, so ready for more socially and culturally. Like in another life, I could have called you my friend, right? I don't remember the line exactly, but like that's one of the last things he says before he dies. Like the other Roman commander and uh, the Roman commander, and she is very clearly. He knows she's trying to manipulate him into getting the Enterprise, but she also genuinely interesting. She tells him her real name, and we know thanks to Picard that it's a big deal. I mean, maybe she's lying, but maybe she's not. Who knows? um, and I think that he's touched by people that are so close to Vulcan, but are also so able to be emotional without being totally unhinged, because they're not unhinged. I mean, like, she's doing her job, and after all, they're the one invading Romulan space right now. So she's very, very reasonable for somebody that is protecting the space that they are invading. And I think it touches Spock. And also, we don't know what happens when she's, like, you know, made prisoner, and where it goes and how much he learns about Romulan culture. But it's very clearly thanks to her that he knows that there is more to Romulans, that there is more than the Tal Shiar, that there is more than the army, and that there are people that are interested in logic and you know, in Surak's teaching. And that's where I think he's like, yeah, we could do that. There is a substrate of people that are not represented by the Romulan Senate that do want peace and do want, like, exchange that is not based on violence. And I do think that, you know, it would be nice to know what happened to the Romulan commander after that.
It
And
really
how much
would.
yeah.
Um, can we just briefly talk about one of the things I find the most fascinating about the Romulan people is naming conventions and how important a Romulan's name is, right? Because
Mhm.
and you're the Romulan expert, you can remind me or tell me if I'm wrong about this. Romulans have two names, right? They
Yep.
have like their military name and they have their house name, right?
Yep.
One that two separate names that they use. And
They have
they
the public name
yeah,
and the
they're
family, the
yeah.
inside name. Yeah.
And they are very, very hesitant to reveal them. Remember, we were speaking about Eye of the Needle earlier. The scientist
Mhm.
does not reveal his name until near the very end of the episode, where he finally trusts Janeway on who they really are and really feels their plea. I love that aspect of Romulan culture.
Mm-hmm. And Narek doesn't give his name
Yeah,
either, and he
same.
tells his name like later. And you know, there's this whole thing where, like, the name is something very intimate and very private, and we don't know what she says to Spock, but he likes it. He says it's a beautiful name, like he has any clue. but but yeah, it's always for me very touching to know that we get Nivar thanks to her in my headcanon. It's thanks to her, like, diplomacy and also a will to not just blow them into beats right away, that we get President Tarina and all the thing that we see in Star Trek Discovery with Unification 3, and like these people that live together in the end. And it's all thanks to her showing different color to Spock and not just being a dick right away. Sorry. Am I wrong?
No,
That was
no, you're not wrong at
No.
all. No.
We didn't speak so much about Kirk because Kirk is Shatnering over there. Uh, but he spends much of the episode playing a role that it is or him being like unhinged and crazy and making weird decision, or him as a Romulan, right? We'll talk about that like two question downs. But it's a very good episode for Kirk, in my opinion, where he's so complex. And also, I'm changing the question. Don't read the outline. Don't worry about the outline. Stop looking at the outline.
First, you don't
where-
read the outline, and then you manipulate the outline, and then you don't stick
Because we
by the
talked
outline.
about so many things already.
You're so Romulan.
Right. You can talk about Kirk. But no, we spoke about at the beginning that it was a very interesting episode for Kirk, where he was not, one note. He was complex. We don't know what's going on. He's also like morally gray. We don't know what he's doing. He dies. He's not dead. What do you think about Kirk and that mission in general in that episode, MC?
Well, I remember in Unification where Spock talks about cowboy diplomacy.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people who are like, Kirk is actually very diplomatic. I don't know if cowboy diplomacy really applies. This is cowboy diplomacy. This is absolutely cowboy diplomacy. This is the only way things are going to work with the Vulcan. Sorry, I keep on doing that. The only way things are going to work with the Romulans.
She's
And I actually
so into unification. See,
I am. I feel like going about things the proper channels with the Romulans, they're not going to respect you. But going about it this way, yes. Him being erratic with the crew, I'm not too sure with. I mean, I know we need to have plausible deniability with the crew, but he is also telling Scotty, if something happens, blow up the ship.
Yeah.
which I mean he should do.
Yeah.
I mean, he should, but there's. I do have to wonder how desperate Starfleet was to send their flagship to do this.
Fuck him.
This seems because this whole thing of if they catch you, blow up the flagship with probably the most people in Starfleet aboard, instead of maybe sending in like one or two spies that are actually like trained to do that.
But don't you think that it's the only reason that the Romans actually like intercept the ship and not just blow it up? It's because it's the Enterprise.
That's fair. That is fair.
Another ship, I think they would just like.
They've proven that they will. They were already doing it in Balance of Terror, right? They were just
Well, they were attacking star bases.
Star bases,
because
that's
they were
right.
being
Yeah,
dicks and
yeah.
being a problem. But I think like any other ship, they would just have blow it up without even decloaking. And that's why they send the Enterprise, because they're like, they're not gonna blow up the Enterprise. They're gonna want the Enterprise. And then it gets us an in and get us a way to actually get the cloaking device.
So
Yeah.
who is the real honeypot? Is it the Enterprise or is it Spock?
It's always the Enterprise. Don't you
Enterprise.
know? She's a handsome lady. Julian?
I think that this is not to the same desperation, but this is the Cisco, killing the Romulan senator to a lesser degree, right? Again, what MC said about cowboy diplomacy, like this is an era of Starfleet where you have to imagine Archer is still probably alive. He's old, but like, he's probably still alive doing something.
Still alive.
Yeah, he's probably
Fucking
making
eagle.
some interesting calls, and one of those is maybe, Jim, you're going to take the Enterprise. You are going to just skip the neutral zone, and you are going to go into Romulan space. By the way, you're going to steal a cloaking device. And in this period of the Federation and Starfleet, where they did only fight a huge war, maybe 100 years later or less, it's a good call on Starfleet, to try and do this. Unfortunately, it doesn't end up working out the way they want, because even though they get the cloaking device, they have to sign this treaty where they're not allowed to use them ever again because of the way they acquired it. Um,
Which is bullshit.
which is
Like, I'm
bullshit.
sorry.
No,
It's
it
always
is.
been a bullshit. Like,
It is, but here we are. I love how Kirk takes this because it's not exactly the same, but he's just right to the point, and it reminds me of Jean-Luc in Chain of Command, where he
yes.
doesn't say anything to the crew and they just do the mission, and there is some questioning, and all of a sudden Jellicoe is in command of that ship. And much like Jim tells Scotty, blow up the ship if this doesn't work, they leave Picard to die, right? When Starfleet does a mission like this, it's all out. I'm going to use this word for the 10th time tonight, plausible deniability. And Jim plays it really well, faking the death, doing all of that. Like, it is a really good episode for him because someone said it in the chat, Romulan commander isn't after Jim. So like Kirk gets to do, like Shatner gets to do some good acting. You know, when he's in the makeup and pretending to be a Romulan, it's
He's so proud of it.
yeah. And then Spock gives him like the ultimate burn at the end. He's like, these do not look good on you. Go take them off right now. No, I thought Kirk did a great job, and I think he was doing what Starfleet mandated him to do. You know, it was really well done.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to have an episode where Kirk is not monotone in the idea of like he's not only doing one, we're gonna go by force or we're gonna do diplomacy. You know, it's like he goes back and forth between the two, and he's so in control throughout the episode. He's never doubting that this thing is gonna go down like planned in his head. Only his head, by the way. Nobody else had anything to do with this. But for me, it's very interesting that that's for me the Kirk that you see in A Quality of Mercy, because that's what makes Kirk such a great captain, is how fast he is to think on his feet and to react and to act and to lie and to do the right thing, and the boldness that he has to just go to the Roman ship dressed as a centurion and be like,
and it works.
You're gonna have problem. It works.
Yeah, it works.
And I love that this is the Kirk that you see in A Quality of Mercy, and that is the only one that can deal with the Romulans, because he has this thing where he's ready to bend the rules, but also he always have his eyes on the objective, on the end game, and he's like, haha, end game. And and he's going through that insane plan that works, and that plan works only because he's certain of everybody else in the crew doing what he thinks they're gonna do, and his intrinsic knowledge of them is what makes it work. And I love Kirk in that episode. He's so good.
If we're going back to the mission, Congress Starfleet would have had to believe the Romulans were at risk of using their improved cloak to go to war to launch this crazy mission, and I would disagree.
But we know that from Balance of Terror.
Well, we do, but I would still say it's not just. I don't even think it's risk of war. I think it's risk of they could fly all across the quadrant, completely invisible, and drop a bomb on Earth. I think just the threat of that alone is enough to make Starfleet go on this mission.
They fucking do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, we know they have planted like people on Vulcan for like decades.
And we learn in Strange New
TNG.
Worlds they did it on Earth as well with the temporal
They
Cold
are
War.
on
Yeah.
Earth. They are everywhere. And that's the thing, is that I think they know that there are a bunch of Vulcan going around that are most probably Romulans. And even the Vulcans are not sure of this. Like it's, what's the name of that Vulcan ambassador, Vulcan priestess that end up being Tar Shiar all time long in TNG?
Oh, the one in, I think it's Data's Day?
I think I don't remember. Like, they're supposed to like get her to somewhere, and she gets kidnapped by Romulans, and they try to rescue her. And like, well, she was a Romulan plant all the fuck along. And I think there's this thing that, like, you know, we see it in Drumhead, that anxiety that the Romulans are everywhere. Like, they are the communists of the 50s, right? And And there is this idea in that episode that it's about the Cold War, right? It's not about them necessarily. They know they're doing shit. They know they have spies. They know they're flying through the quadrant. But you need them to know that you have the same power. And that's important. You have the atomic bomb. I have the atomic bomb. What do we do now? And that it's all about the balance of power. I think they need that cloaking device to tell them, we know you're fucking around. You know what? Now we are too. What you can do about it. And
It's so cool at the end of the episode to see the Enterprise cloak too.
yeah, and then never use it again.
Never
and
use
we
it
never
again.
talk about it ever again until DS9. But all is well. And I like the fact that he tells her at the end, military secrets are fleeting. Like, this is a secret now, but it's not gonna stay a secret. And also, and she tells him, and we're gonna learn how to scan for cloaked ships. And they're like, uh-huh. They just move along. And I think this is really like about balance of powers and how like the Romulan Empire and the Federation managed to keep that neutral zone going because they keep stealing from each other until they keep that status quo going all the time, which is very interesting. I mean, I love the politics of Star Trek.
100%.
So like I spoke about like, Strange New World. So let's talk a little bit about like the implication of that episode down the line for Star Trek, because I think it made a lot of babies. Not necessarily Romulan Vulcan babies, but a lot of babies. So it's one of the first episodes where we see somebody physically altered to resemble another species. Kirk becomes a Romulan. There's no big DNA shenanigan about it. So, like in Strange New World, but Spock is very clearly like not into that thing at all. Like he doesn't like it. He's like, please take those off. Please go back. Do you think that episode of Strange New World where Pike is gonna become a Vulcan, spoiler, but is in the trailers, is what is going to inform why Spock doesn't like it? I'm just going off like fan theories now. This is MC.
Nope. I think
No.
they just wanted to do species shenanigans in that episode.
All right, nobody is into my
No,
theory.
I'm gonna say yes, simply because
Thank you.
no, not for the good reason you think. Just because I need some hope that episode is gonna accomplish something other than the utter bullshit that it already is. And I more than both of you have been very patient with the Spock shenanigans, and that fucking clip just blew the patience away. Like, this better be why he's like, no, go take those ears off right fucking now. Like,
Jean says problematic Romulan face.
yeah.
I would absolutely like there to be some DNA, pardon the expression, but some thread to this episode, because then it would actually have some character development and it would be really nice. But I have lost faith in these kinds of species shenanigan episodes.
I think that if a series from the 60s can do like you look like a Roman now without being like absolutely unhinged, fake DNA stuff, like crazy behavior, then like why can't Stranger World do it? You know what I mean? Been done before. We can do this. I do hope it explains why he's so like, please take those off.
Yeah.
Right
No, that's what I'm
away.
yeah. Yeah.
Because he has like bad memories of Pike being a Vulcan or something like this, and that he's anxious about what may happen, or even him like having to wear like fake Vulcan ears in what's the name of that horrendous episode that
Charades.
I hate? Charades.
Yeah.
But every time that I watch it now, I think about this. So yeah, and just to talk a little bit more about DS9, I know you will. Pardon me, but also about Section 31. We have an episode here that's very morally ambiguous compared to a lot of TOS Star Trek, where they're the good guys, right? Like they clearly do something that is not great. How do you think that it compares to like the other espionage texts that we have in Star Trek, especially like Section 31, that it can be in the movie or like in Deep Space Nine or Discovery? Like, could that be a Section 31 mission actually, MC?
Yeah, I absolutely think that it could be a Section 31 mission. I think that if this episode were in one of the later series, I think it would be Section 31 rather than something that the main crew would do, because this is very morally gray, and we weren't quite to the point in TOS where it was the real, not being sarcastic about it, Gene's vision where everybody is morally perfect. That was really movies onward, mostly with TNG.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, yes, we get spy mission stuff here that we would not get in later series, but Discovery maybe, because I think Discovery is was a little more willing to allow characters to be interesting.
Yes. Julian?
Mr. Captain 93 literally wrote a few minutes ago as we were chatting, why not just send Section 31? Which is a great question. This is
It was in my outline, Mr. Captain 93.
Yay. Yeah, no, like 100%. This is totally a Section 31 mission, but I think if you want to look at it and really dissect it, yeah, you could send people trained in spycraft to do this, but you also have Jim Kirk, who is the youngest captain in Starfleet. He's the smartest captain in Starfleet. He's got the best crew. He's got the flagship, which is one of the most advanced ships in the fleet. I think you send the best people possible to do the hardest job. And stealing a Romulan cloaking device off of a Romulan ship is the hardest thing that you could possibly do, and they do it. I don't know if a Section 31 crew would have been able to get it done. And if, like, you know, the only good thing to come out of Section 31 doing it, and if they fail, is that they get blown up and they work in the shadows, so there's a lot more plausible deniability. But here, no, I mean, yeah, it is a typical Section 31 mission, but it's sending the best person to do the job in this situation.
The thing that's funny is that what happens next? Like, the Enterprise crossed way far into Romulan space, stole a cloaking device, kidnapped a high-ranking officer, and just bailed. And like, I'm like, there's no repercussion. Like, nothing happens. Like, the Romulan are not pissed. They're not gonna go and like kidnap one of your ambassadors. Like, I'm like, everybody knows it's them. Like, Tal is here. He's gonna write his report, being like, "Yeah, Kirk, Spock, like the doctor, whatever his name was. They came on. They kidnapped the girl." Like, what happens next? You know, it's such a weird thing that there is no Romulan repercussion to it. And why that? Because even when we see like in TNGs with them, you know, when they're trying to get that guy out of the Romulan Empire, small going the what's the name of that episode? It's in season 1. Like, there's a lot of repercussion. They're like, he's gonna die, and they actually murder him. So it's just weird to me that yes, it's Section 31, but also it's so in their face. It's so obvious. It's so not secret.
It's a blatant display of Starfleet's power that they did this. Yeah, yeah.
I think a lot of people are gonna die from this. By the way, like, the Romulans are retaliating like all around the neutral zone. You know that
all 3 of those ships, those people aren't seeing their families ever again. Like,
oh yeah, and yeah. I'm like, you know, the fact that the Romulan commander was like made prisoner, like she doesn't die, but they're all dead. They're all done. Like, this is bad. And I like that the episode finishes like at like a kind of a high note, and all the rest of Star Trek like informs you that these guys are screwed. They are screwed, because in the Quality of Mercy, you see how the Romulan commander is like the Praetor, when she shows up, is like, they're all gonna, she blows up the ship, and she's like, they're fucked up. now they're dead. Let's talk about the behind the scenes a little bit. I know it's like we're going long. I'm sorry,
We're not.
Julian.
What do you mean we're going long?
doing very well.
We're doing great.
Oh, we'll talk about women in power at the end then. So behind the scenes, I'm messing with the outline. I'm gonna have problems. Behind the scenes fact. I chose 3 different things that I personally like, but if you know more things, please feel free to add. First of all, the Romulans using Klingon ships. So
Season 3, no money.
season 3, right? It's funny because we had the design of the bird of prey in Balance of Terror, right? And then we have this Klingon ship, and they even say the Romulans are now using Klingon ship, and you're like,
It is the most throwaway line ever, too.
yeah, it's like add post prod, like
Yeah.
just the fans are gonna be mad, just say something. So that's one of the fact that always cracks me up. It is because I think they didn't have the design anymore, they didn't have the maquette anymore, and they just had the Klingon ship, and they're like, I will film the Klingon ship season 3, right? That's one of the things that always cracks me up.
It's still
But I
really
like the-
cool. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. You go ahead.
Go ahead.
I know, because I think you're gonna say what I'm gonna say, so I'll let you say.
It's just really cool that they try to like work it into the like story, in my opinion, and they still have like those ships, and they're just like, oh yeah, and then the bird of prey, is it the Romulan bird of prey, is it the Klingon like bird of prey, like it's gonna participate to that whole thing later on. I don't know if you have anything to add about this, MC Julian.
No, that's
Season
Season 3.
talk. I did it for you, Julian. Go ahead.
No, so what I was gonna say was I actually think it's really cool, even though, okay, we're out of budget, we're out of money, we're gonna just use Klingon D7s. They still put the bird of prey at the bottom of them, like the Romulan design, to specifically say, hey,
the Empire.
and I believe if in like the footnotes of this episode or other episodes, this is one of those weird situations where we know, like, right, that the Romulans lent Starfleet the cloaking device for the Defiant. I want to say the Romulans bought the design of the D7 from the Klingons. It wasn't like they stole it. Like, they made some kind of, like, even though they hate each other, some brief partnership where they were able to, it's in the notes, buy the design.
Yeah, I like the fact also that it's just like we don't have the maquette anymore. It's just like that, but it can be a whole thing in the story, in like the relationship between the empires and what's going on, and like the cloaking device and all this. I find it just funny that we just always find a reason for things when it's just like budget. The second one is for MC. The first one was for Julian because it was ship, right? And this one is for MC because it's ships.
Thank you.
But very interestingly, the scene between Spock and the Roman commander with the Ozjesta, I'm gonna mispronounce this, but like the Vulcan finger touching, as is actually invented by in Journey to Babel, but also like reprised into that episode. The script called for Spock covering her body in kisses. Okay, DC Fontana, we see you. Okay, and Nimoy and Linville were absolutely against it and designed that scene to be more alien and less human. What do you think of this, MC?
I think they had absolutely the right instincts, because this was something that Fan and I discussed a lot while we were watching this, because they were telling me, it's like, this is so hot. Like, why is this hotter than if they were just making out? And I was trying to explain it. It's like, oh, this is how Vulcans and I guess Romulans, that is their version of making out. But it is alien, but there's such an intimacy to it. And I actually think this is actually legitimately the sexiest scene in Star Trek, because there is a certain invasiveness and goofiness about seeing people slobbering all over each other. And it's not just the hand gestures, the music, and the way everything is framed. It's very intimate, this whole scene. And I think it's done very well. And it created a wonderful lore.
I see
go ahead,
I see your sexy hand finger things and raise you. Naked Now and Lower Decks orgy in the Cerritos Lounge.
Romulan
I
orgy.
quit. I
When?
quit.
Julian, you wanted to add
That's
anything?
it. I just Lower Decks.
I do think that it's very interesting that they pushed to like they're not humans. They mostly don't have the same display of affection, and it's something that I would like Star Trek to do more in. New Star Trek. I mean, I feel Discovery did it very well with the Klingons, making them really alien, or even having 10 Cs and so on, like having like other species being very alien. Um, and I feel that we should we Star Trek should add more like to this to like the Andorians and the Orions. Like, they are not human, and even in human culture, like display of affection varies so much already that it's interesting. But what I also like personally is that we know that Vulcan telepathy goes through their hand, and I
Yeah.
wonder how much like was shared between them two of knowledge or of emotion, because she says I've never been this touched like this, like the emotion that goes through like these fingers. And I think it's very interesting to add a layer to that episode of like maybe she knew, maybe he told her, maybe there's something more going on here than just like a very erotic gesture. Also, I love what she's wearing. I'm like in love with that. It's not a
very
dress,
pretty.
it's a jumpsuit. Just FYI, I want everybody to notice. These are actually pants. Incredibly enough. But the fact that she comes in like the super sexy thing that is like so 70s in itself, even if it's not the 70s yet, it's gorgeous. Like those earrings, everything. Like she's doing the full display, right? She's like going in. But yeah, it's one of the fun behind the scene facts. And the last thing I wanted to discuss is DC Fontana was famously one of the very few women working on Star Trek in the writers' room, and she was also an incredibly powerful woman in Star Trek. Star Trek, we know, was exist thanks to Lucille Ball. So, like, the women in Star Trek have been instrumental in like making it happen and also keeping it happening. Like, this season 3 of Star Trek exists only because Joe Trimble did that these letter campaigns to keep Star Trek on air. So it's very interesting to see a woman writing on a show that exists thanks to a woman fan. A Roman commander is a powerful woman. How do you think this episode in DC Fontana informed all the women in power that we see in Star Trek, like all the way to Janeway and Michael Burnham?
Well, I think DC Fontana is foundational in all things Star Trek, and especially in all things Vulcan, because we know she also did Amok Time. She did so many episodes. I believe she also did Yesteryear for
Yesteryear,
TAS.
yeah.
One of the only really great episodes of TAS, and I say that as somebody who likes TAS. I do not think that what we think of as Star Trek would be around without her. And talking about the Romulan commander, and we also think of other powerful characters. She worked on Amok Time, or she did Amok Time.
T'Pring, absolutely.
T'Pring.
Yeah.
And I believe she also probably had a hand in Journey to Babel.
I think so. I think she wrote Journey to Babel, no?
Yeah. I think so. I think a lot of the Vulcan episodes, and
I don't know the Vulcan episode of DC Fontana. That is true.
and certainly Amanda Grayson, you cannot call a not powerful character.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of the episodes where you're not having the female character swooning into her arms, into Kirk's arms, do come from her. And I think that is because she was the only woman in the writer's room, and you did have this boys club who are just, the women are less, they're the sexy lamps rather than actual full characters. And I do think that these characters, they're not characters that we really think of when we're talking about characters like Janeway. That you do talk more about like Yoro Uhura, who is of course somebody that is foundational, but you can't discount somebody like the Romulan commander because this episode is so big for a woman in power.
Absolutely. Julianne, you want to add anything?
I do. Yeah. I mean, DC's Valentine is like a fucking legend. Period. End of story. And I don't think that you can like look at this episode and then not say, well, we have all these other amazing women in power started because of her. I think, unfortunately, I will say that because of Rick Berman's involvement, TNG kind of
We have women of power despite
yeah.
Rick Berman.
Despite Rick Berman, like I unfortunately TNG does take a bit of a step back, but there's hints of it
Totally.
still, right? Because there are some really
Beverly
strong
Crusher.
yeah, well, Beverly, I'm talking about like, you know, more like
Mhm.
background characters. Like, you know, if we're speaking about Romulan specifically, I forget the name of the episode where Deanna goes undercover, like the Romulan commander. Face
of the enemy.
Deanna's strong in that, and the Romulan commander characters. And, you know, we have, you know, we've talked about her a lot
Hilaire.
this week. Well, yeah, you have Claire, but you also have Denise Crosby coming back in a really strong role as Sela. But then I feel like you don't have, you know, DC Fontana, I think, is why we have Jerry Taylor show running Voyager and writing Voyager, and that's why we have Janeway. But then I really have to give credit where credit is due, more so to Alex Kurtzman and what he did with New Trek and what Michelle Paradise did with Discovery and Michael Burnham, and you know what, bringing Seven back in and making her a strong female character in Picard instead of just someone in a sexy cat suit. You know, the legacy is all there, even if it had some stumbles along the way. And you know, you bringing number one back, and how Rebecca Romaine, I think, has just done an incredible job with listen, I think we all agree we want some more number one episodes. Like, with what little she's had to do, she's done an excellent job. So yeah, it's all there because of DC Fontana, and I would say because of Romulan Commander.
And it's interesting because like I was on my free time, I like reading. Uh,
Me too.
I like reading old panels from Star Trek conventions from the 70s. So some of them were recorded and some people wrote them down on website, and I go down and I read them for hours. And there's like this interview of DC Fontana and Majel Barrett of all things and a fan. So the panels, like people would just come and ask questions, and there was not like really panels. Like it was just like people showing up and be like, "Do you think that's Spock?" It's like just this, and it's absolutely insane. It's so funny to read because imagine the question of people who have like just two seasons of Star Trek in their whole life. Like it's not like us, we're like 800 episodes later, you know. And there's this woman that shows up and asks about strong women in Star Trek and why there's no more strong women in Star Trek and when they don't get to do things. And DC Fontana is very defensive, and she goes like, "Well, I'm not a radical feminist," and everybody applauds in the room, and Major Barrett is very silent. And it's a very interesting thing to see, to remember that like they had to fight a lot to get anything on screen, like especially with Holland Ellison, like all that gang that was like, you know, holding the scripts of Star Trek. And I do feel for DC Fontana of how much she had to like do to get all those episodes in, and how strong she had to be to, you know, push through all this. But yeah, our episodes are like amongst my favorite episodes. Like Diane Duane, that writes a lot of Star Trek novels. Like women are so woven into the Star Trek fandom that, you know, you can't really acknowledge them. You cannot really review Star Trek without acknowledging them. Okay, final thoughts, people. MC, what are your final thoughts for the Star Empire?
If you had not chosen this episode, I might have. The only reason I didn't say anything is because I know you well enough to be like, this is Girafe's episode. The property of Giraffe is written all over it. But I love this one. I think that this is such a solid episode for Kirk, for Spock. I love the Romulan commander. I love so much about this episode: costumes, music. And it's just like a really ridiculous spy plot. And I love watching it. I never get tired of watching this.
Julian?
Yeah. there's so many reasons why I share like a strong love of the Romulans with you, Giraffe. This episode is one of them. Face of the Enemy is really what gave me my love of the Romulans, but this episode is up there with it. Yeah, I duh that you were gonna choose this episode. Romulan supremacy all the way. Yeah. It's just, yeah, it's I would say it's fuck it. I think it may be the best episode of TOS. It's fantastic. It's really good.
Yeah, I want to tell you that there's a fun fact in the chat that I didn't know is that Toraf, who was the commander in Face of the Enemy, was supposed to be the Romulan commander, and Linville was not available, and that's why it's not her.
That would have been
I would
so
have loved
cool.
that. Thank you, Eric the Red, for the fun fact that I didn't know. I keep learning things. And I'm gonna add one more fun fact. That episode was released on my birthday. Not the same year, people. Not the same year.
No, you're a
Thank
Romulan.
you.
It is the same year. You look great for like 120. Like, come on.
Thank you. 120. But yeah, so it's like it adds to like a little bit of like my love of the episode. Anything else to add? I hope you saw that the Romans are back. My people in the chat really like my poster behind me, which is DC Comics. The Romans are back. It's with Savick and it's signed. It's signed by Robin Curtis.
Oh, that's awesome.
Nice.
Let's go for the mailbag. MC, can you take Eric the Red?
Sure. Eric the Red wrote, "Where do I begin with one of my all-time faves? While the espionage plot is fun, especially with Kirk and Spock acting like they can't stand each other, the chemistry between Spock and the Romulan commander is just so damn good. Fontana turning a Cold War-inspired spy episode into a bigger episode about finding common ground between different individuals was inspired. While Balance of Terror introduced the Romulans, this episode, I think, was more influential in how the Romulans were portrayed and in beginning the idea of reunification. It's sad that the commander is a one-off character because she was one of TOS's best. I'm probably not alone with having a headcanon that her relationship with Spock continued after this episode into the TNG era."
I hope you read Vulcan's Heart, Eric the Red, because it's all about this. Just saying. Julian, can you get NYRLite?
I sure can. NYRLite wrote, Star Trek meets Mission Impossible is my favorite season 3 episode. It shows TOS could still hum in season 3 when pros like DC Fontana wrote the script. The fact that Fred Friedberger said he didn't think the episode worked dramatically tells me just how little he knew about Trek. The Romulan commander is one of the most memorable characters in all of TOS.
Yes, and I'm gonna take Dana. Dana wrote, "The drama, the sexual tensions, and the spy mission sneakiness makes this such a great episode. It draws you in from the first moments and holds your attention until the very end. The costumes are amazing as always. Watching this episode remastered on Paramount Plus made it all the better. I truly forgot how much I love this episode and will definitely be adding this to my list of favorite TOS episodes." MC, can you take K-Dubs?
K-Dubs wrote, "The Enterprise incident is a season 3 look at what could have been if we had more episodes written in the style like DC Fontana. The spy games, the sexual tension, Kirk playing the role of a commander on the brink of a breakdown to fulfill his mission. This is a great episode and a breath of fresh air from season 3. Too bad we didn't get more like this."
That is true. Julian, can you take Mars?
Yes, Mars wrote, I admittedly had never seen the Enterprise incident before. DC Fontana did a great job layering the intrigue and tension as we went along. I loved how we as the audience aren't fully aware of what is the truth. Typically, Kirk himbos himself at the commander while Spock remains demure. Props to Shatner. He really does crazy so well. I mean, come on. The line's like, I'll kill you. It's so
I'll
good.
kill ya.
Yeah, it's so good. It was at this point that I checked the timestamp and said audibly, dang, I'm only 20 minutes in. What could I say about the commander and Spock besides saying It's getting hot in here.
Take off all your clothes.
Her fuck me boots. Spock trying to get his fuck on. They're wits and bits, as I'm calling it, so hot, y'all. Plus, she tells him her secret name. Lordy, I had a nice laugh at keeping Kirk in the Romulan makeup and the Starfleet uniform. I could see some cigar chomping exec being all, don't you take him out of the makeup. Let's use it to full potential. See? It's a great Spock episode for me as it shows how loyal Spock is to himself and the ideals of Starfleet. But at the same time, he is so moved and affected by his encounter with her and their secret. And then we end on the the speciest comic
Thank you.
relief. Could have been a perfect episode besides that.
And I'm gonna take us home with Colleen. Colleen wrote, as many times as I've seen this episode over decades, I never enjoyed Spock perpetrating an out and out lie as much as I did yesterday. I was downright gleeful to see him work his seduction on her and her falling for it all. Hook, line, and sinker. Spock, you dog. So, our favorite episode series continues next week with Hawk and TNG's Measure of a Man. I was gonna read I was gonna read what's written here, which was an order to me, right?
Yes, it
Follow
was.
us. Remind listeners to follow us. Follow us on social media. Join our Patreon and leave us reviews. Thank you all. Miosh, Angel and True. See you next week. Not Vulcan salute, but Romulan salute. Good night.
Thanks for beaming into our podcast today. If you want to keep the hailing frequencies open, you can subscribe on Apple and Google Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify. Like what you hear? Put in a good word with Starfleet and leave us a 5-star review.